class. So today we are going to be talking about chapter 7. So let me get that brought up for you here. Okay. All right, so the first topic in chapter 7 that I want to cover is the idea of interdependence and independence. And these are different types of sort of family culture, family style. So a lot of times we look at these two different types of styles as black or white. It's either one or the other. I think that most often we find that a lot of families are in the gray area, right? There are some things where we want to teach our children to be really independent in, and there are other areas where we want to teach them to be interdependent, or at least we hope that that is sort of a trait that we pass on. So these are things we might hear from parents, and it kind of helps us when we hear these topics, or we hear these are quotes that I made up, but if we were to hear these comments from parents, we would be able to sort of think, I think that they're thinking about this in more of an interdependent way or an independent way. So our 4-year-old sleeps in the same bed as us. Okay. This is something that we hear frequently from some parents, and a lot of parents have very specific beliefs on sleeping arrangements. Some children are invited in if they need to. Some are never allowed in. And so if you hear this, just be thinking what you think, interdependence or independence. Child arrives at school potty trained and the parent is beaming with pride to share the news. Okay, so that's a big milestone for a lot of families, and for the child themselves as well. And so being really happy to share that could give you a clue that the family is in one camp or the other, or at least when it comes to potty training. The 3-year-old expects to be fed his lunch and goes for a nap with a bottle. Okay, this is very cultural sometimes in terms of this interdependence or independence. And so this is not necessarily completely out of the norm for some families. Parent packs a spoon in 12-month-old's lunch with expectation that he will use it. Okay, so that's another, these are just ways that you can be thinking about how this child and this family how this child is being raised by this family, and sort of what the expectation of the family is. Child cries at separation from parent and is told to be respectful, don't fuss. Okay. And that one is a little bit tricky, I think, anyway, as far as would it mean interdependence or would it mean independence? And last one here, we use the cry it out method for sleeping. Okay. Now, some of these things may have brought about some real feelings for you all, or you may have identified with either how you were raised or how you are raising your own children. And that's fine, right? The point is never to not have our own kind of beliefs on what we feel we want to do for our life. But the point is to be more open-minded to the way that other people might be raising their children, and know that it's appropriate to have multiple approaches. I remember being told as a young parent, most children don't go to college in a diaper, right? And her point being, every phase passes. When you feel like you're in a hard spot, or something's taking longer than you expect, they're probably not going to go to college in a diaper, right? And so that was a good way for me to remember too, in thinking about interdependence and independence. Everybody has a different way of doing things. If a child isn't potty trained by 2, it's okay. They're probably not going to go to college in a diaper, right? Or if they have separation issues, it's okay. They're going to move out of that phase at some point, and it will all be okay. Okay, so your last chance to think about independence and interdependence. Let's see, drum roll. Let's see what they are. Well, where do they go? Now my slides are not moving at all. Man, I'm really building the suspense here. There we go. Interdependence. So this black side here was interdependence. So that might seem pretty obvious with the sleeping in the same bed, right? And there's all different versions of this, right? Some families are like, no, never. They are in a crib at, from the moment we bring them home, and they're never allowed in our bed. And then you have others that have like a family bed. And then you have everything in between. And essentially, it's all okay. You just have to be prepared to kind of think through some of these things so that when a parent talks to you like this or says these comments, you're not like, what? Oh, I would never, right? You have to be able to think through some of this so that you are not reacting in a judgmental way, right? If it's not abuse, then it's an option, and it should be respected at least for what it is. And if there is some concerns, then that can have discussion, but it needs to come from a developmental standpoint versus a judgmental standpoint. The next one, child cries at separation from parent and is told to be respectful and not fuss. This is an interesting one that I had to think about a little bit because in families that really value interdependence, it's not only with the family group, it's also with other groups. And so in this scenario, they're asking the child, hey, you're part of this group now. You don't need to fuss about not being with me. You need to acclimate to here, and you need to be okay being a part of this group. And so it is part of interdependence, which sometimes that's a little bit of a tricky one. And the 3-year-old expects to be fed his lunch and goes to nap with a bottle, right? For some of us, that feels a little old, maybe, to expect that. We want to cease typically, and this is me being probably more independent minded when it comes to raising my kids, but I want to see them doing things for themselves and learning those skills. But for some families, that caretaking, that nurturing, they want that to last as long as it can between that parent and child, because that is what creates the foundation for more interdependence. And then the others seem probably pretty obvious. Packs a spoon with the 12-month-old, expecting that he will use it. Hopefully the expectation is not too high that it will be without mess, because that wouldn't be an appropriate expectation. So it has to be, hopefully from the parent, more of a, we want them just to get used to holding it or practice holding it. If they actually think they're using it, to be really specific and have that expectation of, proper manners at 12 months, then that could be a launching pad for some discussion on development and what's appropriate expectations. But again, it would come from, a non-judgmental place. It would be just more, yeah, we can give that to him to introduce it and and he will progress with that type of expectation. Child arrives at school potty trained and the parents beaming with pride. I mean, most parents are pretty happy when their kids are potty trained, but some don't mind, or they're just like, whenever the child does is fine. And that's a spectrum too of, you know, some parents think, well, some parents sort of watch their children's cues, and that's actually more interdependence, but they watch their children's cues even as infants and they hold them over a toilet. And then others do it for them until they feel like, I think you're at a point where you can do this yourself. And so there's everything in between. And then using the cry it out method for sleeping. That is pretty obvious, a parent that wants them to sleep independently. And so that, you know, hopefully that makes sense. And if you have questions about that, let me know. But I think it's good to think of some of these situations in which we might hear this information from parents at some point when we're working with them. Especially, I did a lot of sort of daycare, preschool aged type options. But again, this is something that we need to be aware of, that there are different parenting and family styles, and to be open to that and actually learn from that, and, you know, ask them questions about it rather than make a judgment or a reaction right away. And all of this kind of stems from, how do we have dialogue with parents? We want to be able to take their perspective. That's kind of what this image is showing, is to be able to put different glasses on, or look through different lenses, to be able to be sensitive to different cultures and different families. And one way we can do that is by using some key points within dialogue to make sure that we are having open communication with families. And so one of the first things you want to do is just to gather information. This is not the time when you're trying to win an argument. This is literally just, okay, tell me more about this. You know, you're asking like inquisitive questions so that you get as much information as you can from the family. And to further that, you continue to ask questions. So those kind of go hand in hand. You're trying to get information from them, but then you keep pulling more out by asking questions. It's not about telling them what you think. So if you're ever in a situation where you're feeling like the family is doing things differently than I would, or even developmentally, you're not feeling like it's hitting the mark, and you feel like there might be a point where you need to give them some education, you don't want to just start by throwing education at them. You really want to use some of these techniques for dialogue. So after you ask questions and try to get as much information you can, you really want to be a learner. That's the mindset that you need to have, is how can I learn about this approach this family is telling me, even if it seems off. There could be a reason why, and then it helps you see through their lens of how they're looking at something, and it helps you understand them better. And a lot of times when we can understand somebody better and their intention, then things make a little bit more sense, right? It's not just that initial thought of, I don't agree with this is wrong. It helps you be more open. And again, being able to recognize multiple viewpoints. All of this, that's kind of the point, is to be able to see that there are multiple ways in which we can raise children and help them learn and grow. And there isn't just exactly one path. And so we need to be able to use multiple viewpoints as well. And then watching your body language. Your body language needs to be more relaxed, more open, sitting here with your arms crossed, furrowing your brow. Like if you cross your arms, your brow just furrows naturally. So don't do that. Just have a really open stance, a pleasant, pleasant demeanor. Maybe find a comfortable, quiet place for you two to talk where you're both sitting or you're at the same level. That's really important too. And then try not to do a lot of gesturing, right? Even when it is time for you to share. You know, if the hands go on the hips and the finger starts to point, your information will not be well received, even if you've tried to look through their viewpoint and be a learner and ask lots of questions. You'll kind of ruin all of that setup if you do that. When you find yourself in a situation where you're feeling conflicted, or a family is conflicted with you and you're needing to really explain to them a little bit more, these are some points to keep in mind. So the first is reflect. You want to self-reflect yourself. You want to think about what you're bringing from your own experiences or your own mindset or how you were raised. You want to bring into that some awareness and think, is this more of an issue that I have personally because of some experience? That's why a lot of times in the class with discussions, I'm having you think back to your own childhood or your own thought process in some of these things, or how you feel about things. Even though we're talking about kids, we have to do our own self-reflection in order to really be able to kind of clean the slate as far as how we feel about things and be open-minded to what a parent is telling us about their child. Next is explain. So this is after you've done some listening. With that previous slide, you've done those points and you've listened really well. Then it's time for you to share. And also give your reason, you know, why you have the perspective you do. Is this, if you've self-reflected and you've realized that this is really your own belief system, but it's not the only way, or that development can support both options, then, you know, talking through that reason and talking through that perspective is really helpful. And again, you want to understand. That means you're recognizing where they come from. You're also hoping that they can learn from your viewpoint as well, but it's more of a learning moment versus, I told you so, I'm telling you how to do this, you should do this my way. And then you want to negotiate. So that's where there's that gray area comes in on that previous slide where we talked about interdependence and independence, and how a lot of times there's that gray in that middle. I feel like this is true with almost everything in life, is there is a gray middle area. Nothing really is black and white. And I think this is where the negotiation process is where you brainstorm to compromise, right? So you're finding what they call that third space. So not this one, but the third space. And that's really a big enough space where both viewpoints can come together and find a reasonable solution that makes almost everybody happy. Okay, and the thing is this is not like a one-time deal. This is something that you have to do repeatedly. You have to re-educate yourself from time to time on cultural norms. Always be a constant learner, but you have to repeat this process as necessary, as often when working with families, because you really want them to understand that and you need to understand for yourself that there are various methods of parenting, that we need to value diversity within the parenting realm and the cultural realm, that we know there are differing family values and that that's okay. And when you value cultural pluralism, you're really decreasing cultural bias. And that's a big part of what you want in your classroom, is for everybody to feel safe, parents as well as the children. If children pick up on a very different approach between school and home, and they don't feel that school is supportive of home, that adds a real conflict to that child internally. It's not something they can always identify, but if they sense that the teacher is not respecting the parent, it makes the child feel like they have to choose, and that's never going to support their learning as well as if people are coming together and they're seeing examples of compromise. Okay, so on the same note of culture and family sensitivity, we want to think about programming. How do we incorporate some of these values? And it's not just in word or the variety of children that you enroll in the school, right? It's also what you don't allow in. So when we're thinking about types of books or media that we include in our programming, we don't want to include things that support stereotypes or misrepresent cultures, a culture's history. That's important. Children need to see in books or the media that you do use in your classroom, they need to be able to self-reflect. They need to see children that look like them or people that look like them in those stories, so that it can help them identify with that. When differences do arise, right, it's good to bring them out in the open. It's good to use effective communication skills like we just talked about, to work through them rather than making hasty judgments, because again, that's going to create that dysfunctional or toxic relationship with the family that is not helpful for that child's learning. And even when coming across a cultural bump, your text describes it as a cultural bump, recognizing that this is normal. It's part of working with other people. We are all human. And so there are going to be bumps along the path through every relationship, parent-child, teacher-parent, parent-parent, children within the same classroom. We're all human. We're all going to come up against these bumps from time to time. And just, I think, recognizing that that's normal and that there are healthy ways to work through that. And you actually grow and develop and mature through those bumps if you work through them the right way. Or with some of these principles we've talked about, rather than ignoring them or just trying to make somebody believe what you think and not being open to any other suggestions. Okay, so one option, because I know we've talked a lot about the younger group, this is an example, a short video with an example of a multicultural classroom and how really the whole school has certain programming elements in it to create that multicultural experience for children. Let me scroll down here a bit. Make sure that's the right video.
A little-known briefing in Brown versus the Board of Education found that students who attended segregated schools really struggled with how to reconcile the truth of segregation with the myth of the American dream. Intergroup contact in a sustained and meaningful way makes that American dream more attainable. It allows children to see the value of their peers of different races and socioeconomic statuses, and it allows them to interrogate how race and class can be assets in a democracy and how opportunity is distributed among students from different backgrounds.
TCF's research on fostering intergroup contact is designed to help educators who are committed to making sure that diverse enrollment in their school overall translates into truly integrated classrooms where students, teachers, and families have the chance to form meaningful connections across lines of difference.
One of the most important steps to making sure that schools establish intergroup contact among students is to make sure that the adults can model that type of behavior. If the adult population in the school isn't diverse enough to meaningfully model intergroup contact, then the school has a responsibility to hire enough adults to make that work.
It's really the backbone of our school for students to form connections. If you address the social, emotional needs of students, if you have your staff go to cultural sensitivity training, you will promote a feeling of family and acceptance.
Schools can also assign time and spaces for children of different racial and socioeconomic backgrounds to interact with one another. Those can be play groups, clubs or activities, or a shared homeroom that's intentionally diverse.
At Harvest, we work really hard to facilitate connection among our students. Every student goes to an advisory. It's a 12 to 15 person group with one teacher. In some ways, it can feel a little bit like a group therapy session. It can also feel like an academic advising session. There are a lot of times where students share something that they're excited about.
Building community amongst students and families does not happen only within the confines of the classroom, but it happens outside of the classroom as well. We offer what we call community programming, which is opportunities for families to come together and have an activity together. Sometimes we do cooking, sometimes it's art, sometimes it's music. What are the spaces where we can all access, and how do we bring folks together in order to create spaces for community within the school walls? Those connections then build out into the hallway, into the classroom, and then onto the neighborhood streets.
I think food brings everybody together. Potlucks are really, really popular. We also have family picnics in the summer, so our PTSO is really good in hosting some of these events.
Our school has a very extensive outreach program to all families. We invite them in for a multicultural festival. All students and families bring in food and celebrate.
We've also developed playing and learning squads, which is an opportunity for younger students to be placed into play groups. It's a space for kids to get together and connect with each other as human beings.
Schools should also think critically about how to bring diversity into pedagogy. Are children working in diverse pairings? Are they working on projects together that challenge them in diverse groups? Are your classrooms detracked so that children of different backgrounds and ability levels are working together in the same space?
If all schools were committed to providing opportunities for students to form meaningful connections across lines of difference, I think we would see a very different political reality and public discourse in our country. Having the chance to learn from, with, and alongside peers who are coming from very different backgrounds than your own gives you the chance to understand how to better communicate who you are and how to understand the different perspectives that people are bringing to issues.
The idea that people can approach the same problem in different ways is kind of fundamental to understanding the world and kind of fundamental to being a successful college student, to being successful in one's career, to being a successful family member. Our students get a chance to practice that, and that fundamentally will help them navigate the world and navigate the problems that they see.
Okay, that is such a cool school. And that leads us into our next slide. Okay, so cultural pluralism in the classroom. We just saw a great example of what that looks like with that school, all the way from the littles to it looked like high school. They are using this model, and really the first component is to be the model, right? We get to set the stage for families to feel included, to bring children together of different backgrounds, different races, different ethnicities, and different cultural experiences, because we all come from something different. No matter what we look on the outside, we all have a different experience in this world. And so being able to bring children together early to value that and respect that is key. And that comes from the programming principles that a school puts in place from the beginning. Also valuing the home language. Language is one of the cornerstones of a person's culture, and because it's how you communicate with other people within your culture. And so it's kind of that link, even when there are variations between families, there's still that link that if they all speak the same language, it ties them together. And when there is a conflict between the language at home and the school language, or the child's belief that they have to drop that home language because school isn't supportive of it, that really adds an internal conflict to that child. And if the home language does begin to drop, that sets that child up for odds with their family and generations behind them. So grandparents speak the language, but now the grandchildren don't, and it makes it hard for them to communicate together. Judgment, frustration within the family can begin to arise. And it's really a loss of a great benefit that that child could have in the future, which is bilingualism or multilingualism. There's such a need for that. And so the school really should value the use of the home language and find ways to feel comfortable with that. Many of these cultural interactions and valuing diversity should come from social interactions. So bringing children together so that they can learn from one another. And a lot of times this comes in through the form of play. So we're going to watch another short video here to finish up the day or the lecture and see how culture can come in through play here.
Children's play preferences reflect the values that they're being raised in. Children from a more individualistic culture may prefer to spend time alone. They may prefer to spend time doing competitive activities. They may be more caught up in individual achievement in smaller groups, maybe more exclusionary activities, whereas children raised in more collective and collaborative culture may emphasize inclusion and play in larger groups and be less concerned with the competitive aspect. Another way that cultures differ is the level of expressiveness that's allowed, that's or encouraged. That for some children, some cultures, the restraint is very important, and learning to mask your feelings is a priority. Other cultures, it's to be very expressive. What may appear to be sort of rambunctious or aggressive in one classroom may not be. Another way that play would vary is the roles that children play. If your child is being raised in the rural area, they may be enacting farming roles, taking care of animals, driving tractors. In a city, children being raised in the city may be driving taxis and buses and enacting those kinds of roles. Very often in suburban areas, you see lots of children being the soccer moms. They'll be driving cars and playing on their cell phones at the same time. You can also bring in cultural differences with books and puzzles and songs and learning words in different languages. If you have a book that represents another culture, don't just read the story and drop it. You can build around it with doing stuff in the pretend area. You can do art projects along with it. You can do songs with it. You should be sure to understand the cultures and not just the surface, as we mentioned before, not just the artifacts, not just the cooking, not just the clothing, but really try to understand the values of the culture, because that underlies a lot of the things that you might be bringing into the classroom.
Sorry guys, I can't see. There we go. There's my pause button. Okay. So that pretty much wraps up our lecture for today. It kind of brings everything back together a little bit, thinking through, coming full circle here back to play and how we can bring about culture, but not only culture, but the independent versus the interdependence in together through opportunities of play for young children, or into the programming like we saw, that entire preschool through high school school setting. So I hope this gives you a little bit of ideas to think about, self-reflect a little bit on how you were raised as well and how your school experience was. Do you think it brought about and valued culture? Did it feel like it separated people, or did it try to put everybody in the same group, even despite differences? It's good just to think about these options so that we can then think through, how do we want to be the model for young children in the future? Okay, have a great day.